Now it's my pleasure to invite the next speaker, Ms. Emma Sairanen from Finland. And she actually has a very interesting role in terms of the process, because a lot of participants who are a part of this meeting here, are extremely interested and enthusiastic in participating in shaping the Global Biodiversity Framework. But very interestingly, Emma actually is a part of the national delegation that is negotiating the Global Biodiversity Framework. She was a part of the Substa 24 and the SBI meetings, and certainly an indication of not just the interests and aspirations of youth voices, but how governments and how the national delegations are increasingly recognizing the important and strategic contributions youth make as and when countries make decisions for future of this particular planet. So it's a great pleasure to invite Emma, because I was very thrilled, because many times we do aspire to be as a part of the national delegation rather than contributing from outside. But here is an opportunity that Emma, you have to be a part of the delegation. So we certainly would like to hear from you about your experiences and plans. Over to you, Emma.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It is a great pleasure to be here today. So that was a great introduction. I am Emma. I'm from Finland, Europe, and I'm the youth delegate for climate and biodiversity in my country. So I thought I could start by quickly telling you the story of how I got to be in this really exciting position, maybe also as an inspiration for you of how you could push for including youth in your national delegations. So what happened with me was that in Finland, we have a youth delegate system. So we have youth delegates that go to the UN meetings, the UN general meetings, and then into the climate COP meetings. But we didn't have biodiversity delegates before. But I was chosen last fall to represent Finnish youth as the youth delegate for climate. And when I was chosen to this role, I got to know youth delegates from other countries. And by getting to know other youth delegates, I also got involved in Global Youth Biodiversity Network Europe. And Global Youth Biodiversity Network was really wanting to push for more national delegations to have youth delegates in their delegations. And I thought this was a really exciting thing to push for. And I decided to join the efforts. And I contacted then my local youth council and told them that I think it would be important to have young people not only speaking for the climate, but also speaking for biodiversity issues. And I asked if it would be possible for us to contact the environmental ministry of Finland and ask them if they would like to have young people in their delegation as well. And that's how then with the Youth Council, we got in contact with the Finnish focal point for CBD. And they were actually really excited for the young people to contact them and ask to be part of these discussions. And from there, it then went on, and now I'm part of the Finnish delegation. But I definitely would not have been here without Global Youth Biodiversity Network and the support and inspiration from them. So if you're interested in similar opportunities, I really encourage you to get involved in these networks that are already working with these issues, and then together contact your local governments and ask for them to include youth in these discussions. But then maybe next I could share just some thoughts about how it has been as a youth delegate. And I'm going to share you a few things about the Substa and SBI negotiations that were before summer, and then something about the preparation for the open-ended working group that will start next Monday. So the meetings that happened before summer, they were basically two different preparatory meetings. One that was discussing what needs to be done to stop biodiversity loss globally, so more on the technical and scientific side of what needs to be done. And then there were other meetings discussing how we can get to these goals. So, for example, what kind of money we need to mobilize, or what kind of capacities we need to build. And I was part of these meetings 1 week after I was chosen to be part of the Finnish delegation, so everything was really new and really confusing for me. And in the beginning, I felt like I have no idea of what I'm doing, or no understanding of what is being discussed, because I was so new to the topic. But what really helped me was joining some capacity building workshops from Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and just talking with people who had been in these, young people who had been in these processes for a longer time. And then slowly, by being involved in these capacity building exercises, I got to understand more of what is actually happening and what are the processes taking place. And one document that was really useful for me was the CBD in a nutshell. This is a report or a paper written by Global Youth Biodiversity Network on the whole CBD process and everything. So if you're in doubt of understanding what is going on, or need some help with some abbreviations or something, I really recommend to have a look at the CBD in a nutshell. Well, then the negotiations, there were a lot of topics discussed there, and since it was quite hectic and new, I decided to concentrate on one topic, and so I tried to follow only the discussions on the Global Biodiversity Framework, so the discussions on the post-2020 targets for biodiversity. And yeah, for people who are new to the CBD, I really also recommend that you kind of concentrate first on one topic to get to understand it better, and then maybe look at other topics as well. During the negotiations, I was then also keeping in contact with Global Youth Biodiversity Network and seeing what kind of visions or thoughts youth had on the issues being discussed, and then I passed on the messages to my delegation. So I think it was a really successful co-work that I could pass on the youth views very efficiently to my national delegation. Working with the delegation, they are usually super busy, and I'm actually a bit intimidated about contacting them sometimes, because it seems like they're running from meetings to another day and night. But the way to then contact my delegation was through email, and we had also a WhatsApp group, so there I could pass on the youth views. And also I had access to all of the documents for my delegation, so when we were preparing speeches or something, I could also add comments and youth views into those. Then one of the ways to get to understand the meetings better is to take notes. So at least Global Youth Biodiversity Network and the Finnish delegation as well, they take notes during the meetings. So if you have a chance to participate in note taking, I think it's really useful because it helps you to understand what is being discussed and keep track of things. Well, then after the summer, there was a bit of a break, and then in the mid-July, the new draft for the post-2020 targets was published, and from there, the Finnish delegation and the EU delegation started preparing for the meetings. So there was first reading through the draft paper and then having meetings between different countries discussing views. And well, I found it always super interesting to be part of these discussions, just to listen into the experts, because when you listen to the experts, you learn so much and always start to understand things a bit better. For example, in the beginning, I thought it was really funny that we would discuss some little wording for such a long time, but then when I understood that, well, these are legal texts, which means that it's really important which words you put in. It kind of puts it into context why we need to have these long discussions of each word. And also sometimes I would think like intergenerational equity is something really important for youth. But then when we were discussing this with a delegation, I got to learn that some countries may have a problem with this word since it does not have a general UN definition. So discussions like these really help you understand things a lot better. So if you ever have a chance, I really highly recommend to join. But maybe my final notes for you guys would be to, if you want to get involved, definitely do get involved and really try to lobby in your countries for them to also include youth delegates in their delegations. And if you need help for that, at least Global Youth Biodiversity Network Europe is doing something related to this. Then join forces with other organizations that are working on the topics, and try to get some capacity building, talk to people who have been in the CBD process before or with organizations. Then if you are participating, also communicate about your efforts so that other youth can also get to know what is happening. And do read the Global Biodiversity Framework first draft that is out now and that will be discussed next week. And if you find things confusing at the beginning, do not fear, you will get to understand it slowly better when you're involved. Thank you so much for listening and hope you got something out of it.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you very much. A good synopsis and an overview of your experience, from being a very confused participant in the delegation to somebody who has got a little bit of a clarity. And certainly the 2 points you mentioned is don't have any fear of looking at the language or the text that is before you, because most of these processes work on long text and important elements of it. So it's the more you read, the more you hear, the more you interpret, the more you talk to experts, the more you will gain. So certainly, thank you very much, Emma. And what I'd like to do is to very quickly make a short presentation on what this Global Biodiversity Framework is all about. Certainly I'll be followed by a presentation from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network in terms of how the youth networks from different regions, different countries have actually already started engaging with the process, what their experiences are and what their aspirations are. And certainly that'll be followed by a colleague of mine who actually leads the youth work at UNEP and through this particular program, Mary Paniwa, who will be also speaking. So certainly with that, maybe I will start the presentation to very quickly give you an overview of this biodiversity framework, the elements of it. So thank you very much. And let me give you a little bit of a perspective to where we are 2021 when we are discussing the Global Biodiversity Framework. And I'm sure not all of you, but definitely some of you were born by the time 2002, during the COP meeting at The Hague. That was immediately after the Copenhagen COP of the climate change. The parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity met and then decided in terms of the need to have a global set of targets to achieve the overall objectives of reducing the rate of loss of biodiversity. So for the first time, it was in 2002, countries adopted an 8-year framework to reduce the rate of loss of biodiversity. It had 8 targets and 21 sub-targets. But what was interesting, even at that time, was that the discussions that went into shaping these targets and the sub-targets were not looking at biodiversity conservation in isolation, not looking at sustainable use and access and benefit sharing in isolation. But if you look at the overarching goal for the first set of targets that was set, it was more in terms of reducing the rate of loss of biodiversity in order to achieve poverty eradication. So certainly, we've seen a significant amount of intent as well as interest in countries trying to put together a set of targets, a set of goals to achieve biodiversity conservation, sustainable use, and elements of fair and equitable sharing of access to genetic resources and subsequent benefit sharing. And for those of you, if you look at the history of the negotiations, if you are interested to go back and see how all of these actually had been shaped up, the discussions that went into shaping the first set of targets in 2002 honestly had very little consultation and stakeholder engagement and participation. It was more in terms of almost a last-minute rush, learning from the experiences of the climate COP that there is a need for having a certain number of targets rather than talking about biodiversity for posterity without metrics, without indicators, and without numbers. And during the period, which was 2002 to 2010, as many of you would have realized, was also the time when the development paradigm was also receiving a lot of attention through the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. And even though there were 8 targets or 8 goals of the MDGs, goal number 7 focused on environmental sustainability, the only sub-targets that focused on issues related to biodiversity for that particular period of 15 years, 2000 to 2015, were focusing on the issue of red list, reducing the rate of threatened species and red list, and also the other target was related to water and sanitation. So once the 2002 Global Biodiversity targets were adopted, it took almost 3 years to discuss at the General Assembly to include a sub-target under target number 7, target 7B, sub-target 7B, that actually started focusing on the need for achieving the 2010 targets in order to achieve the MDGs. And subsequently, all of you have heard, we to an extent lived through this period, 2011 to 2020, when during COP10 in 2010, based on the experiences of implementing the first 8 years of the first set of targets, countries got together and adopted what now are called the Aichi biodiversity targets, a set of 20 targets that were adopted. And very interestingly, during the implementation period of 2011 to 2020, we also saw the reiteration of the global commitments to sustainable development. And unlike the first set, which is the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, as many of you would have read and are aware of, today has 2 very specific goals, not just target, not sub-targets that were added at the last minute, but these were negotiated right from the day go and adopted subsequently. Goal number 14 that looks at the issue of oceans, and goal number 15 that looks at terrestrial biodiversity, or life on Earth and life in the oceans. So it actually was a very big success in terms of our ability to link conservation and development together. And today, we actually are focusing on achieving the 2 goals in addition to the other 15 goals that are a part of the Sustainable Development Goals. But what was not very encouraging, even though we were able to get that much of attention and focus on biodiversity, whether it is the 2002 to 2010 targets or the 2011 to 2020 targets that countries have set for themselves, the assessment of the progress made and our ability collectively to achieve those targets, as many of you would have heard or read, has been rather limited. So we continue to lose biodiversity. We continue to be challenged by the problems related to ecosystem management. We have problems of sustainable use, issues related to mainstreaming. So certainly the signals, the results that actually have come out of 2002 to 2020, a 12-year period, certainly was not very encouraging. So when we actually are discussing the current global biodiversity targets, a few points that one should have in mind is how is that countries are able to learn lessons from the implementation experiences, but more importantly, how countries are going to be setting the targets and the related instruments for effective implementation of these targets so that we do not end up after 10 years in 2030, where we actually are limited by our ability to celebrate the success of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So it is in that context, the Global Biodiversity Framework draft that is going to be discussed from Monday next week until the 3rd of September is extremely important, not just to get the language correct through the negotiations, but to get the overall focus, to get the principles, to get the implementation framework associated with these targets correct. And as of now, many of you are aware that the 2021 to 2030 framework includes a set of 4 goals and 21 targets, supported by 38 as of now indicators that are still under discussion and will be negotiated and finally adopted during the in-person meeting of the 15th COP, the Conference of Parties to CBD, during May and June 2022, tentatively as per the details provided by the Secretariat. But then it's important for us to understand what this framework is all about. The framework actually talks in the first few pages about the theory of change. What is that this framework would like to achieve? The current status is very clearly mentioned that we are losing biodiversity, and because of it, the human development and well-being is really being compromised. And the mission to deal with is to use a set of tool solutions that reduce the threats, that also meets the requirements of people through a set of implementation options, through a set of enabling conditions that are created, and also ensuring that whoever works on these kinds of issues do it with responsibility and transparency. And the framework also focuses on a set of milestones that actually speak to the objectives of the convention, so that the 2050 vision, the convention on living with harmony in nature, is achieved. Having said that, it's probably important for all of you to understand. Many of you would have read the particular document, the draft framework and the targets and the goals. But for purposes of ensuring that we all start with a common understanding when we start the discussions, I'd like to very quickly mention about what these goals are. One, goal A talks about ensuring the integrity of ecosystems is enhanced. And certainly that looks at not just the area, but also the connectivity of the ecosystems, the health and the populations of species, and also all the issues related to both domesticated biodiversity and wild biodiversity. It is supported by 3 milestones. I'm not going to get into the details of it, that actually contribute to achieving the goal. Goal B speaks about valuing, maintaining, and also ensuring that when we are working on some of these issues, the nature's contribution is maintained, enhanced, and valued much better than what it is now. Supported by 2 very specific milestones. Goal C focuses on The benefits from utilization of genetic resources are shared fairly and equitably. As you know, speaking to the third objective of the Convention on Access and Benefit Sharing, with a substantial increase in both monetary and non-monetary benefits to people, including for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And this goal is supported by two milestones that are a part of it. The last and the fourth goal is to reduce the gap between the financial requirements for implementing actions to realize these goals and the framework and the associated targets, so that we can achieve the 2050 vision, where it calls for additional financial resources for implementation, not only for the period 2021 to 2030, but interestingly, the third milestone related to Goal D looks at preparing countries beyond 2030, where it looks for a period 2030 to 2040, countries already will start planning having additional and adequate financial resources that could be committed during this particular 10-year period. And as I mentioned, that we actually looked at a lot of enablers to dealing with it, reducing threats to biodiversity. There are 4 targets that are related to that in terms of ensuring that all land and sea areas are under integrated biodiversity conservation. At least 20% of degraded freshwater and marine and terrestrial ecosystems are under restoration, including with connectivity. 30% of the global land and sea areas are protected and managed, including through area-based conservation. All of it to also contribute to ensuring active management of actions to conserve and protect the species and the genetic diversity of both wild and domesticated species. That includes ex situ conservation, when species are managed outside their habitats, and in situ conservation when species are managed within the habitats. Target 5 to 8 focus on issues related to sustainable use as well, ensuring that harvesting, trade, and use of wild species is sustainable, legal, and safe for human health. It also requires reduction on the negative impacts of invasive alien species on ecosystems and biodiversity. Target 7 calls for reducing the pollution, including in terms of nutrients that are lost to the nature, to the environment, and so elimination of discharge of plastics. Target 8 focuses on the issue of climate change, where it calls for countries to have adequate measures for mitigation and adaptation, so that biodiversity conservation contributes to at least 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide in terms of mitigation efforts at the global level. Few targets focus also on the issue of meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, where we have target 9 that focuses on the contribution of conservation for nutrition, food security, medicines, and livelihoods, and target 10 that focuses on agriculture, aquaculture, and forestry, that these areas are managed sustainably and effectively, all of it in a manner that enhances the contributions of nature for having clean air, clean water, and also protection from hazards and extreme events. Target 12 looks at increasing the access to and benefits from the green and blue spaces, as you know, relating to protected areas, but also beyond protected areas for human health and well-being. Target 13 focuses on the implementation of measures for facilitated access to genetic resources and fair and equitable sharing of benefits, and all of it supported by a certain number of tools. And what are those tools? Integrating biodiversity values into all kinds of policies, regulations, and development frameworks at the national level, including on areas issued related to poverty reduction. All businesses, whether they are small, large, medium, or private or public businesses, to consider their contributions, not only looking at the impacts on biodiversity, but also how their activities can contribute to enhancing the conservation aspects of it. Target 16 looks at ensuring that people are encouraged and enabled to make responsible choices in terms of decision making, looking at alternative choices that could ensure that biodiversity is conserved into the future. Target 17 looks at establishing and strengthening capacity for us to deal with issues of biotechnology. As you know, there is a protocol under the convention called the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety that looks at the safety of biotechnology or living modified organisms on nature, biodiversity, and ecosystems. So it asks for countries to enhance the capacity to prevent, manage, and control any adverse impacts of these organisms. Target 18, very important in terms of the finances, to look at redirecting, repurposing, and reforming and eliminating incentives that are harmful to biodiversity to a tune of at least $500 billion per year. So it is to reduce the negative impacts of the incentives on biodiversity. Target 19 looks at increasing the financial flows for implementing this framework, where it is looking at an overall requirement of about $700 billion per year in terms of their $200 billion per year in terms of implementing the framework, with a new and additional effective financial resources of at least $10 billion per year that is available. Not just the resources, but also the ability of countries and stakeholders to secure these resources also need to be enhanced. Target 20 looks at ensuring relevant knowledge that includes traditional knowledge and modern knowledge. Innovations and practices of indigenous and local communities are appropriately respected. We take consent of using their knowledge, guiding the decision-making process thereof, but also focuses on the issue of education and research. And the last, and the 21st target, looks at ensuring equitable and effective participation in decision-making by indigenous people and local communities, but more importantly, respecting their rights over lands, territories, and resources, as well as by women, girls, and youth. How do we make this happen? We have an integrated governance and a whole of government approach, a whole of society approach, looking at effectiveness in terms of how the conventions related to multilateral environmental agreements on biodiversity and others contribute to achieving these targets, and also looking at gender equality, access to education, employing or using the rights-based approaches. Responsibility of different stakeholders in achieving this framework looks at establishing national targets by the respective countries in support of the global targets, having a proper reporting mechanism of actions that are being undertaken, enabling the evaluation of collective actions, and lastly and importantly, the development of additional and complementary approaches to allow other actors, other than the ministries of environment, other than the government agencies, to contribute to implementation, but also to report on what they are doing in terms of their commitments and actions. Supported by a set of outreach activities on increasing awareness, increasing the understanding and preparedness, but also promoting and developing platforms and partnerships that we can try and manage some of these kinds of things. But how do we measure all of this at the national or global level? These are to be supported by a set of indicators that will tell us what kind of numbers, what kind of information we need to have to assess the progress towards achieving the post-2020 targets or the framework. A number of indicators, as I mentioned, have been suggested. There are five targets for which indicators are still to be developed. For 8 targets, they are near ready. For 3 of them, they're partially in use. And for 5 of them, they are in existence and they are being used. So with that, I will sort of end my presentation. And the idea of essentially this presentation is that to discuss with you, to work with you, and through you, we get into the future of securing the biodiversity on this planet. Thank you very much. So with that, the presentation is over, but I would like to now invite our colleagues from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We have 2 colleagues from GYBN, Shweta Stotrabhashyam and Andrea Morales, who will be speaking about the experiences of engagement of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network within the process of the development of the Global Biodiversity Framework, but also the associated subsidiary bodies that led to the draft framework that we actually have discussed. The floor is to you, Shweta and Andrea.
Thank you so much, Mr. Balakrishna. I'm very, very happy to be here and have this opportunity for us to share about the work that we are doing as the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. So I'm just going to share my screen in a minute. For everybody who was here and for all the people who have spoken before us, you've got a good idea of the kind of work that the world is doing right now, what's happening with biodiversity at the currently, and what are young people doing for it. And we at the Global Youth Biodiversity Network here to tell you a little more and a little more in depth on how you can be a part of this amazing process as a young person. So firstly, welcome to the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We're really happy to be here to share with you some of the amazing things that young people are doing across the globe. So for those of you who do not know GYBN, we are a global youth-led network which engages and empowers young people across the globe. We are also the official youth coordination platform for the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this is largely who we are as a network and what has brought us to where we are. So for those people who haven't heard about the CBD, but from Mr. Balakrishna's presentation, you've seen it quite well. But the Convention on Biological Diversity is an international agreement, which is a general framework of action to protect biodiversity. And it has three major objectives, which is conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use, and the fair access and benefit sharing that arises from genetic resources. GYBN as such, we are the youth coordination platform under this Convention on Biological Diversity. And our role, as I was mentioning to you, is we do a lot of youth-led actions. And our actions are largely can be categorized into a few different types of activities. So we work on empowerment and capacity building work, as Emma and several of the other colleagues before have mentioned. We also work on advocacy and campaigning, which happens around the negotiations of the CBD. And we also work on mobilization of more young people and actions on the ground. Our impact has been expanding over the last 10 years. We just celebrated our 10-year anniversary in 2020. And over these last 10 years, GYBN has grown immensely in number and size and capacity. And we're really happy to inform to you that we are now we have several national chapters on the ground with over 50 national chapters currently, where young people are self-organizing themselves on the ground as chapters to mobilize more young people in their own countries and communities, so that we turn into a growing network of networks. This is some of the key things that we have created, and one of the flagship publications that we have that even Emma has mentioned is the CBD in a nutshell, which was initially created as a resource for young people to understand what the CBD is by young people. And slowly it turned into such a massive resource for everybody that even currently new negotiators who are coming into the CBD process also read this book as a guiding document to understand the process. So for us, it's a very exciting experience to see that a resource created by young people for young people is now being used by all generations, and is now also being translated into almost all the UN languages. So here is a glimpse of some of the capacity building work that we have been doing over the last 4-5 years. And these are pictures of our regional workshops that we have created, which has also instigated several of our chapters to be created on the ground by the young people who come for our workshops, engage and understand how they can support the implementation of the strategic plan on biodiversity, and how they could support their governments on the ground. So these are some of the glimpses of the kind of work that GYBN has been doing over the several years. The last year has been a lot of online workshops, which we've also done to build capacities, which has also helped us create many more young people who are inspired to be a part of our process. So over these 10 years, GYBN has turned into an amazing, vibrant global movement of young people, where all of us are working together to halt the loss of biodiversity and live in harmony with nature. We are currently growing massively, and as I said, we have over 50 national chapters. We have over 1 million members, and our members are doing work, several projects on the ground. We've also reached over 10 million people over the course of our time, as well as had several people viewing our content. So now that I've given you a quick overview of what the CBD is all about, I am now handing it over to my amazing colleague, Andrea Morales, to explain to you what we are doing currently and what is GYBN's role in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. So this year, these years now with COVID has become, last year was supposed to be the super year for biodiversity, and that has now translated into several years, maybe even 2022, to be the super years for biodiversity. And the reason it is so is because, as you guys know, there is this new global biodiversity framework that is being negotiated so that we can move towards living in harmony with nature. And Mr. Balakrishnan has very clearly explained to you some of the details of what this post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework is all about. It is a global agreement, as he's mentioned, with a set of defined targets that he has very beautifully explained to you as what are being currently negotiated in the current draft. And this is supposed to be the next 10-year framework that is going to take over from the previous framework. So therefore, for the next decade, based on what kind of actions need to come into this framework, young people do need to take a critical role and a position on how they can be a part of this process of creating this new framework. So we very beautifully set out a roadmap in the beginning of like 2017, 2018 on how we were going to do this and how we were going to engage, and how GYBN was going to engage youth in a roadmap towards the post-2020. And the way we set it out is in a 4-step process. We started off with creating several toolkits, mentorship programs, and trainings to build capacities in young people so that they could take over the leadership in their own countries. This was followed by doing consultations, where we created an online survey, which even you guys will be taking part in. We also did several virtual consultations and national consultations. These were done by the chapters on the ground. Following this, we had several advocacy actions. Once the chapters were able to create their positions and they created a set of national positions that they wanted to see reflected in the post-2020 GBF, they would then go and have meetings with their negotiators, as Chantal mentioned to you, and they will go into having these intergenerational dialogues with people. And finally, with these dialogues, they also went on the ground, on the streets, marching, doing campaigns and actions to create awareness about what young people want. So we took we took an approach where we would try to influence the process in all places, wherever we could. This is just some pictures of how intensive some of our consultations were. We've had a four-day-long consultation where we had like 2-hour sessions where young people came together, they brainstormed, they thought about what needs to happen and how it needs to happen. They also went into several methods of system thinking and analysis to figure out how they wanted to decide what is important for them and for biodiversity. So here is a quick glimpse of what we have been busy at work with the thousands of young people who are with GYBN. We've done around 26 national consultations in just the second round. We have over another 15 consultations we did before 2020, and then 26 more after that. So we've had several of the national chapters doing their consultations and creating these youth positions and reports. Following that, they have gone and 12 of them have already gone and submitted these reports to their member states, to their negotiators, to their government officials to talk about what young people want and what they're looking at. And finally, we've had over 100 actions all across the world to talk about youth and the role of what young people want for biodiversity and the future for what's our future vision to live in harmony with nature. So we also have, based on all these compilation of the consultations that we have been holding from 2017, we created a GYBN position paper. And this position paper has a very detailed vision, a mission, and also targets that we set out as what we think are ideal for what we want for the future. One of the critical things that young people always struggle and strive for is to ensure that we push the world to see the long-term vision and not to look at quick fixed short-term solutions. And one of the important things for us is to change the way the values and principles that the world holds as it is, to actually be able to create the actual change or the transformative change we need in the world. We do see that this is quite critical, and we also very strongly push for it. So our vision as such is about ensuring that the society, like this is a vision, as I said, has been developed by the consultations we've had with young people across the globe, thousands of them. And this is constantly being modified as more and more young people from their countries are coming in and giving their voices to this process. So our three main objectives as our vision is to support our life support system and ensure the integrity of this life support system, to ensure that we as a society live in harmony with nature and live sustainably. And finally, to ensure that there is equity for nature and people. The way we as GYBN see some of these priorities and vision being ensured, and the priorities that we are pushing for in the framework is intergenerational equity, which for us is the effective and meaningful participation of young people in the process of the negotiations. Ensuring that the education system that we have in this planet, education across in all forms, is transformative in nature. And we have a very beautiful document that explains to you what this is. We will link it in the chat below so that you can understand why we see this as an important goal. And finally, to ensure that we have a rights-based approach for nature and people. So these are some of the three major things that have come out from our consultations that is being said by young people are critical for what we need to do. I'm going to very quickly explain to you a little bit about these 3 points in just one slide each, so that you can understand a little bit about what these topics are and why young people are fighting for it. And then, if you're interested, we can definitely send you more resources about it and learn more about it. So intergenerational equity for us is this place to ensure that we have a shared responsibility to ensure a fair and sustainable planet for the generations that follow. And that is one of the most important things that we are striving for, to ensure that the future generations are able to fully and effectively participate in the decision-making process that affects us. And this effective participation that we as young people are striving for is very important and is something that we are pushing for under intergenerational equity. For us, education is also seen as a very, very critical point, because we see young people across identify the role that education plays in our society and shaping societies. And therefore, it is a key leverage point to really create transformative change. And this has also been detailed by the IBES Global Assessment Report. And as it is such a key thing, it is something we see as important as shaping values, behaviors, and even transmitting knowledge and capacities to the next generations. And this, for us, is critical that we push for having transformative education as a part of the new framework as well. And we've also explained how it should be a part of the new framework, which is a much more detailed presentation for a later time. Finally, we have the last given priority, which is human rights and rights of nature. For us, human rights is a right for a healthy environment that supports human rights and respects that respecting human rights allows for protecting nature. So human rights need to be ensured as a global instrument on the environment and should be have a prominent role in the post-2020 as well for it to be successful. And finally, rights of nature for us is recognizing the intrinsic value of biodiversity and the rights of ecosystems to exist, to flourish, to regenerate for their own capacities. And this is a key right for us with due regard to the rights of indigenous people and local communities. So these are some of the overarching points that have come out from our consultations with young people. So now, how do you guys get involved in this massive, role that young people are playing across, and this huge train, in a way, you can see that we are creating towards the COP15 as such, and what you could do to be a part of it. So the first thing you should definitely do is, as soon as this event is done, join and fill the survey out so that you can add your voice to this global position that is being created under the Rallying Youth Voices for Biodiversity online survey. The link is here, but we'll also post it in the chat below so that you can see this as well. Then, as Chantal has already mentioned, we created a youth manifesto combining some of the key priorities that young people have across. And we've put these priorities along with all the other major youth groups and constituencies in the world, with the climate change constituency Youngo and UNEP MGCY and several others. We work together to create this youth manifesto, which talks about the overarching points that young people are generating. And what we are realizing more and more is that no matter what environmental struggle you're fighting for, your priorities and the things you're pushing for as a young person are mostly the same. And therefore, we all realize that it is amazing if we could get together and push for it together. And that is what this Youth Manifesto represents. And it has been supported by several UN agencies, as you can see below, and many more who are on the website. So definitely go to the website and sign on to this manifesto and take part and take part and join the actions that are happening based on the priorities explained in this manifesto. You can also check out the actions on the website itself and sign up to do an action as yourself on the ground. The campaign that we're currently running based on all the stuff that we have seen coming out of our consultations is this campaign called The Same Sucks. And let me explain that to you a little bit. So it just says that what young people are feeling right now is that for too long, our politicians, our leaders, and our businesses have fed us the same broken promises, the same too little, too late solutions, and the same excuses, and the same inaction. And for us, this is what we have been seeing from 1992 when Rio started, when young people started getting involved, and we still continue to see these same broken, too little, too late solutions, and we are tired of it. And that is why for us, the way the world is working and the same way that we are continuing to work means doom for us. And therefore for us, we started a campaign as young people to say same sucks. And what for us is the way forward is biodiversity. And therefore biodiversity as such rocks in the world. It is the antidote to all the sameness we see in the world. And therefore we started this campaign on the International Day for Biodiversity to stop the same in the world. And, we wanted to highlight this to you guys as well so that you can join this, because this is going to be our flagship campaign till the COP15, so that you can as well take part in this campaign and create actions on the ground. We have just over 2 weeks when we had launched this campaign and created a push for the campaign. We reached over 10 million people, young people, and several people on the ground. And several people have shared this and interacted with our content. We all have young people across the globe who have been sharing content about this. We also did a very recent protest about Stop the Same with the Fridays for Future group. So we are working very actively with activists on the ground across the globe. So I hope this was an interesting presentation for you to understand what GYBN is doing and how you can be a part of it. We can definitely put more links in the chat so that you can see all about what we are doing and how you can be a part of some of the exciting work we're doing. We are an extremely open network of young people, and we are always happy to have anybody and every young person who's interested in biodiversity to work with us and be a part of this, this fight together. So thank you so much, and back to you, Bala.
Thank you, Shweta. Quite a good presentation in terms of a number of activities and initiatives, also into the future. So before we open the floor for questions, answers, comments, and discussion, let me also mention two very specific initiatives that UNEP is now putting together in terms of youth engagement. My colleague Mary, who will be speaking towards the end, is coordinating the activities here, which is called the Youth Empowerment and Training Initiative, where we are just not looking at bringing a number of youth together to give them a few seminars and webinars and reports to read, but we actually have rolled out a very strategic and long-term youth empowerment program that focuses on mentoring as well. So the first batch we are rolling out in the next few days in terms of supporting youth to be properly oriented, trained, and capacitated. As Emma was mentioning, a lot of time some of these processes are definitely confusing and daunting for a lot of youth. Not only the process, but also the language that is used, the kind of negotiations that happen. So it requires some level of capacity to understand what these are. So what now we're rolling out is a mentorship program, a youth mentorship program with about 35 youth selected from the Africa region to begin with, but we are planning to roll it out to the other regions as well, depending on the interests. Is that we actually have selected the CBD COP15 and the processes related to that as a kind of a starting point. And we provided them an online program that UNEP offers, a certificate course, to make all the youth who are participating come to a very common understanding of the issues related to the convention, the issues of human rights and environment, the issues of the processes within the convention and all that. And in support of the CBD COP15, we actually are now going to be mentoring 3 groups of youth. One group focusing on the issue of finance and resource mobilization for implementation. The second group will focus on stakeholder engagement, and the third group will focus on capacity development. And the way the program actually operates is that on each of these topics, we actually are supported by a select number of global experts who are working in these areas, who will be spending about 4 to 6 weeks with the selected youth and the teams of youth in making them understand the different processes, the different ideas, and the different issues that are being discussed. And at the end of the 6-week period, they'll also be provided with information, guidelines, tools, and training as it is required. And at the end of the 6-week period, the teams will come up with a formal written document that will provide their understanding and their priorities on some of those topics in support of the COP15 process on adoption of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the issues of implementation. But our idea is that these trained youth colleagues will continue to focus on some of these and work with UNEP, where UNEP will be formally publishing and interacting with them so that they become the trainers of trainers for the future batches. So that's one initiative we are rolling out, and our focus on it is just not the convention on biological diversity. The program focuses on several different multilateral processes that includes the conventions, the regional seas, the ocean governance issues, issues of mainstreaming agriculture and all that. So certainly the program focus definitely will be expanded in the weeks and months to come. The second one is actually a strategy on education for conservation, because repeatedly it was mentioned on the need to have transformative education. And with IUCN Commission on Education for Communication, we just about launched a strategy on education for conservation that actually addresses the question of how the transformation education can happen for conservation action. We're not looking at only people or youth who are interested in environment or looking at educational system that focuses on environmental education, but this particular strategy goes beyond environmental education and tries to mainstream environment conservation into different aspects of education and disciplines within education, ranging from engineering to journalism to finance planning to arts and culture. A lot of entry points are a part of the strategy. So we will share with you once the strategy is ready to be launched. And our idea is to take it forward and make it as a kind of a formal guidance document to look at the transformative education as and when we start implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework. So with those remarks, I would like to open the floor for questions, comments,